All right, man, peace. So, brothers, a while ago I did a video on Mr. Antonio Brown, the superstar wide receiver who formerly played for the Pittsburgh Steelers and who was traded to the Oakland Raiders. He never actually touched the field for them in a meaningful capacity, and he now currently is a member of the New England Patriots. And the reason why I was able to deduce that he was an agent of chaos is because, like most people, he showed you the signs of what he actually is about before he actually manifested himself in its fullness. Anyone who's paid attention to Antonio Brown and his hijinks over the course of the last 5 years could have predicted that things would eventually metastasize to the level that they're currently at. And as most of you know, it has recently been revealed that he's being accused of raping one of his former colleagues. I call her a colleague because supposedly she was his trainer. So even though they might have dealt with one another in a romantic dynamic or a romantic capacity, still they work together. How things are going to go in that direction, I'll cover in a video devoted to that topic. But just getting back to the point, Antonio Brown is an agent of chaos and he is a narcissist. And for the most part, those two concepts are interconnected, because when you're a self-worshiper, you do whatever you can to force other people to worship you just like how you worship yourself. And that means that you have to disrupt their environment. And in order to do that, you have to recalibrate how they think, what their perspectives are, so that they can change over what they naturally do to now focus all on you. And in volume 1 of the Antonio Brown is an Agent of Chaos series, I delved into the concept of narcissism, and I stated that for the most part, the modern day female, especially in Western society, is a narcissist. That's part of her programming, meaning everything has to be about her. Your world has to be centered all about her. She's the center of your universe. And Antonio Brown has a lot of those same characteristics. Now, in regards to how well he'll fit in with the New England Patriots, we'll find out. But one thing that we have to understand about narcissists is that they tend to be very malleable when the situation arises that they have to implement themselves into a certain scheme or program until they can figure out exactly where their source of attention and power can come from within that program. Just like the woman, if you deal with her in a personal capacity, she's going to show you an entirely different face than how she depicts herself or how she conducts herself in the workplace, because that's how she's going to get her money. Narcissists understand that if the revenue stream is cut off, it's going to be very difficult for them to perpetuate the mentality that they deserve to be worshipped, firstly by themselves and thereafter by those around them. They do have a sense of scope. People might think that they're entirely delusional. Oftentimes, delusion is a part of the facade that they project out to the masses to make people think that they have no idea what it takes to live in the real world. They actually do. They dip and dive in between the real world and the world of their own creation, very similar to the character of the Joker in the film The Dark Knight. He basically spent the entire film being a promoter and an instigator of chaos just for the sake of doing it. Why is that? Number one, he was trying to establish his own identity. He could not do that by maintaining order. He also needed to figure out who was his alter ego. How was he going to substantiate his own relevance in a society unless he was able to find the opposite aspect of the image that he was trying to project? So eventually he found the character of Batman. For those of you who've ever seen the film Unbreakable, the character of Mr. Glass, played by Samuel L. Jackson, spends the entire film trying to substantiate his existence on the earth by creating scenarios where he can force a superhero to rise to the occasion. He knew within his heart that he was the supervillain, but he could not confirm that until he could force the emergence of a superhero. We also saw this dichotomy a few years ago with Odell Beckham and Josh Norman. Remember, Odell Beckham actually painted the character of the Joker on his cleats the week before they played the Carolina Panthers, because Josh Norman was calling himself the Dark Knight or Batman. We see this play out over and over again, and in general, athletes tend to be narcissistic, and that normally means that they like to promote chaos when it's feasible for them. All athletes, especially super athletes, tend to lean towards that agency of chaos dynamic when it suits them. Even Michael Jordan in his first year in the league. All across the NFL right now, they're speaking about how Odell Beckham wore that watch during the game and how he's going to continue to wear the watch. People forget that in Michael Jordan's rookie season with the Chicago Bulls, he wore a pair of Air Jordans that did not comply with the NBA's standards of how they wanted their players to wear their sneakers. The first Air Jordans were black, white, and red. and they were overwhelmingly black with red in them. The league was fining Michael Jordan every game, and Nike said, keep wearing the sneakers, they're great promotion, we'll pay the fine. So when we look at Antonio Brown right now, he clearly believes that he's in such an advantageous position that he can do what he wants for now because his standards as a receiver are so high, and he's still able to ascend to those standards, that there's always going to be a team that wants him. And the Patriots are the perfect team for him, at least for now, because they're known for taking in talented super athletes. And of course, they have one of the top MK handler coaches on the entire planet, and Bill Belichick, and one of the top MK assets in the entire sports world, or at least the American sports world, and Tom Brady, who we're looking at right here. So of course, they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
Everybody's excited to add, great players. It helps everybody when, you have great players that are sharing the burden of a tough football season. So I think, like anything else, whether it was Josh last year or Philip when he got here a few years ago late, and then, this year Antonio, how much can you learn and process and get in here, and we're all going to work hard and try to get up to speed as fast as possible. But we haven't had a training camp together or that, so it's, you got to force a lot of information, and we're all excited to have him. All I could say is we're just going to work as hard as we possibly can to get up to speed as quickly as possible.
The reason why Tom Brady is allowing Antonio Brown to live with him is because he understands not only does he want Antonio Brown to get to practice and to meetings when he gets there, but he also wants to make sure that Antonio Brown understands the ins and outs of their offense. Because Tom Brady knows as a 42-year-old quarterback, or 41, however old he is, if he can extend Antonio Brown's tenure on the Patriots over the next 3 seasons, that's going to make his job as a quarterback far easier, especially if he can get Antonio to comply with the quote-unquote Patriot way, get him to learn the system. He knows how talented Antonio Brown is. I'm on record as saying that, in my view, when it just comes to pass catching, in the 30 years that I've been watching professional football, it's Jerry Rice and it's Antonio Brown. And I'm sure a lot of cats are going to disagree. They're going to talk about Michael Irvin. They're going to talk about Chad Johnson. They're going to talk about Megatron. They're going to talk about Randy Moss, so on and so forth. All those guys were great. Megatron, in my view, did not last long enough to be evaluated on that level. In my view, he's the overall most talented and gifted wide receiver in the history of the NFL. Randy Moss is probably the greatest natural athlete. The dude ran a 4.25 40. But there are so many games where I saw Randy Moss implode mentally. I just cannot put him on the level of Jerry Rice. When it comes to Antonio Brown, people will say, well, what are you talking about? We've seen Antonio Brown come up short mentally when it comes to associating himself with his team and being there when his team needs him. I've seen Antonio Brown in so many games, playoff games, come up big, that I have not seen Randy Moss come up big in those games. And once again, when it comes to Megatron, we have not seen him, or we did not see him. I have to speak about him in the past tense. We did not see him in enough playoff games to be able to evaluate exactly what he was in the big spot. So over the course of the last 30 years, in my view, when it just comes to route running and pass catching and being able to run every route on the route tree and being able to defeat your man down the field, it's Jerry Rice and it's Antonio Brown. Michael Irvin was great, but I would not put him up there with those two when it comes to hands. Chris Carter was great, but I would not put him up there with those two when it comes to being able to defeat his man down the field. Andre Reed was great, but he was not that much of a downfield threat. They had James Lofton. I mean, I don't want to digress too much, but Antonio Brown, Tom Brady knows what he has.
I'm not specifically worried about anything relative to Antonio Brown. I'm worried about the guys in the locker room and the quality of our execution and what we did or didn't do. Antonio's been off our team for a number of months.
I get that, brother, and I understand where you're coming from. But let me be very clear with this, brothers. I like Mike Tomlin. It's very difficult to dislike Mike Tomlin. But this Coach Boone, Denzel Washington shtick that he's been running with for the last 10 years or so is starting to run out of steam in a big way. He's going to have to show that he can win with this squad this year. They're going to have to go at least 9-7, 10-6, I believe, in order for Mike Tomlin to keep his job. It would not shock me at all if the Pittsburgh Steelers were to implode this season and go 6-10 if Mike Tomlin were to get fired.
That we moved on from that stuff in March.
Ben, your thoughts on Antonio Brown joining these guys now?
Whatever.
Big Ben like, F that nigga.
All right, former Patriot Damon Woody back here with us. We're going to break down that interview with Drew Rosenhaus. Let me just give you the facts again. The same day Antonio Brown asked for his release and received it from the Raiders, the All-Pro receiver agreed to a one-year deal with the defending champs. Now, sources tell our Chris Mortensen, Max mentioned this, that Brown sought advice from professional social media consultants for ideas on how to accelerate his release from the Oakland Raiders. The Steelers traded Brown to the Raiders this offseason for a 3rd and 5th round draft pick, but New England offered a 1st round pick, and Pittsburgh didn't want to send AB to a rival. Remember this other detail, AB was going to get $30 million from the Oakland Raiders.
Let me say this. A lot of people are making a big hullabaloo about the quote-unquote $30 million that Antonio Brown let go when it comes to his association with the Oakland Raiders. It's very clear to me that, at least in his view, he has done very well with investments and with his money, because he conducts himself like someone who does not care if he's able to maintain a steady paycheck with an NFL team. I could be wrong. He could just be a delusional nut job. Once again, he is a narcissist. But that's how he conducts himself. And once the Patriots signed him basically for the same rate, or even a greater rate potentially than the Oakland Raiders has signed him for, he won. Antonio Brown bet on himself. And this notion that all of a sudden it's going to start this domino effect where all these other great players in the NFL are going to do this. No, it's not. We've seen this in the NBA. It's starting to trickle over into the NFL, where players are starting to use chicanery and certain machinations to force trades or instigate trades. But it's basically not even occurring with the 1% of NFL or NBA players. It's occurring with the 0.01%. The top 5 players in each sport. And Antonio Brown is a top 5 to top 10 player in the NFL. He can do this. Believe me, if Antonio Brown was anything less than the best player at his position in the NFL, or considered arguably the best player at his position in the NFL, he'd have been gone by now. Because what's the argument against Antonio Brown? Maybe DeAndre Hopkins, Julio Jones as being better receivers than him. I personally would probably take the both of them over him because they're bigger and a little bit younger than him. But the things that he can do on the football field are magnificent.
Now he will get $30 million from the Patriots if they pick up that option. Max, I'll start with you on this one. Did AB plan on leaving the Raiders from the very beginning?
No, I don't believe that he planned on leaving them from the very beginning. But I do believe that Antonio Brown looked at the Oakland Raiders like how a dude will look at a chick who in her mind believes that she's wife material, but he knows that she's just a concubine. You're with her, but you're basically just waiting for her to start acting up so you can move along, because you know that it's within her spirit to start acting up. And once Antonio Brown saw that the Oakland Raiders were not going to be fully in lockstep with every last one of his bullshit hijinks, he said, you know what? Let's see what we can do. He called up his agent, Drew Rosenhaus, and they tried to figure out what they can do. But this notion that he went to the Raiders already planning to hijack their interactions with that team or that franchise, I'm not buying that.
No inside knowledge of this, but if you're asking my opinion, and this is just my opinion, of course he did. This was an inside job, it looks like, from the outside. Just as Rich...
Yes, it looks like that from the outside, but does it look like that from the outset? I don't think so.
Catches heat, right? For orchestrating things very well. Did it look like the Cleveland Cavaliers a couple years ago were a Clutch Sports inside job? Well, of course it did. I was critical of the Lakers. I'm like, wait, this is a Clutch Sports inside job. What are you not giving them the coach for? You're going to get the coach, you're going to get AD, Anthony Davis, you're going to get this and it. That's what this looks like with Rosenhaus and Belichick. Let's be honest here.
I would agree with that portion. I have very little doubt that Bill Belichick was in very close contact with Drew Rosenhaus, especially as the situation in Oakland started to spiral out of control. Now, how far back their interactions were going, I'm not quite sure if I can speculate. But just the fact that Antonio Brown messed up his feed tells me that he was not all in on any form of Machiavellian tactics from the outset. This is something that developed over time, and Bill Belichick just sat back and watched it transpire and then jumped in when it was the most feasible for him to do so.
Think about what happened. Okay, let me just the facts, guys. Here are just the facts. You connect the dots. The dots connect themselves. What did Belichick want? He wanted to trade for Antonio Brown, according to reports, was willing to give up a first-round draft pick for Antonio Brown. Steelers said, no, we want a first and a second. Belichick balked, of course. He went for a third and a fifth to the Raiders. Soon as he gets to the Raiders, why would he want to go to the Raiders? You can't win. He's not going to win with the Raiders. But he got his guaranteed money. Aha! He was crazy like a fox. He was acting a fool, and throwing tantrums to get out and get his money. Oh, he got his money. Oh, wait a minute. He's really crazy. Look at this. He's giving them a problem with the helmet. Drew Rosenhaus says, well, they got off to a bad foot because of the helmet. That wasn't the Raiders. That was the NFL. Then a million other things, including taping a conversation with Gruden.
Which is illegal.
That's probably why Bill Belichick favors Antonio Brown so much. Bill Belichick is like, Antonio, I like your recording techniques. What software are you using? As soon as you get to the Patriots, we'll talk. Of course, on record.
In the state of California, unless both parties know about it. But guys, Gruden's not going to sue Antonio Brown. That's a distraction from the job at hand. And people would have to know that going in before he even does that. Now the Patriots magically have the exact cap space to give him not only about $10 million up front, but then $20 million team option, which is the same next year,
exactly
the same $30 million he was going to get. Now you say, well, that's a team option, because this is how deals are done in real life. I'm not saying this happened, but I could imagine. We want the option. Well, I have to make sure he's not actually crazy, says Belichick. If I was doing faces on sticks, I'd have to make sure. So we're going to keep that option, but you have my word. If he's not crazy, he's going to get the $20 million. Same $30 million to play on the Patriots. They gave up 0 draft picks. These dots connect themselves. And by the way, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But if you're asking me my opinion, oh my God.
My opinion vibes with yours. I agree. I think that. Let me say this. That's not my concern. Drew Rosenhaus did a fabulous job talking with us just now.
Let's be for real, Stephen A. Smith. Your concern and the main reason why you're so upset with Antonio Brown is because you know that at the very worst, he's a top 3 player at his position in the NFL. And he was the best player on the team that you root for, or used to be the best player on the team that you root for, the Pittsburgh Steelers. And you've been pissed off at him since he left your squad because there's a little birdie that's telling you in the back of your ear, in the back of your head, that your Pittsburgh Steelers are not going to do too well this season. We'll see. Season's just getting started. But it would not surprise me to see the Pittsburgh Steelers have a 6-10 year. But we'll find out.
Do I think that he was not being forthcoming about some things? Of course I do. And that's his job, because if he were to be more revealing and more forthcoming about the interactions that went on, if he was my agent, I'd fire him on the spot. So he is supposed to say that stuff. All right? So Drew Rosenhaus did his job. What I would like to ask people on a day like today, I'm going to bring up Rich Paul. I'm going to bring up Bill Duffy and Aaron and Eric Goodwin and all of these boys. And I'm going to say, just the same way we accord Drew Rosenhaus the level of praise and throw laudables in his direction for being.
You mean the way that you throw praise in his direction?
He is, in his zealous efforts for representing his client.
Is he really being zealous, or is he just trying to make sure that he can maintain the amount of money that he's supposed to receive from Antonio Brown?
To accord that same respect to Rich Paul and the others.
That's why I brought up Rich Paul, by the way.
When it comes to LeBron James. But let's also understand this.
Right, but why is that an issue? Is it really necessary to juxtapose Rich Paul and Drew Rosenhaus? And why are you attempting to make the people believe that they should view Rich Paul as an upstanding agent if they view Drew Rosenhaus as an upstanding agent, when in all reality, you should be encouraging the audience to castigate Drew Rosenhaus for any contribution to this fuckery as they would Rich Paul. Stop trying to get people to look at both as positive, when in reality, if you truly feel like they're the masterminds behind this, they should both be getting viewed as negative. Because what Antonio Brown is doing, as well as what Anthony Davis did last season, is going to make the fan base lose faith in superstar players keeping their word. You're signing contracts that mean nothing.
You know where I'm going when I say this.
You're a black man.
It's a hell of a big difference, an ocean-wide difference between Antonio Brown and LeBron James. You see, when you have a guy like LeBron James, a superstar in this league, a champion in this league,
a charlatan and an actor, an agent of chaos himself, as well as a cultural Marxist who's working under the authority of Nike Incorporated. Continue on. But yes, he is a superstar basketball player, yes.
What we don't do enough is recognize the class that he has exercised throughout his stellar career. LeBron James, to this day, the only blemish on his career in terms of his conduct was that the decision.
Give him a cookie.
That's it. Antonio Brown has lied. He has played teammates and organizations.
LeBron has done both of those things as well.
Acted like a clown.
LeBron has done that as well.
He has embarrassed his organization himself. He's thrown brothers under the bus.
Well, LeBron has done those things as well. I'm not going to say that LeBron has necessarily ever made his franchise look bad, but it depends on your level of comprehension pertaining to what he does and a lot of his exploits. When you hold a press conference and you claim that the front gate of your house was spray painted with the word nigger, and we still have yet to receive an update on that case, that tells me that you're being used as a pawn in the implementation of the Hegelian dialectic to force the unification of the opposites, the quote-unquote white and the black. And you're allowing yourself to willingly be used as a liar, a pawn, and a manipulator for that purpose. Once again, we still have not received an update on that situation. Why is that?
Mike Tomlin, our very own Ryan Clark, Juju Smith-Schuster, when he's DMing you private text messages and stuff like that, you reveal those things publicly. He did the same thing just now to John Gruden. They had a conversation. Drew Rosenhaus connected them. What does this dude do? He goes and he publicizes the conversation on YouTube.
Of course, because Antonio Brown is an agent of chaos. But you clowns in the media are just as much to blame because you encourage these athletes to quote unquote speak out. That's what you guys have done. You opened up Pandora's box 4 or 5 years ago, claiming that not enough athletes are speaking their minds about this and about that. So once Pandora's box is opened, everything comes out. Now they're talking about everything, mostly things that they have no knowledge of and really don't have the adeptness to speak about in a cogent way. But they're running with this concept, and en masse, they're running with this concept of quote unquote being more than an athlete. I.e., I can be a political leader, I could be an activist, I can be a societal force for change. And to a degree, they can be societal voices for change in an orderly way. There's a great nobility in knowing what your restrictions are, how you should not delve beyond your realm when it comes to what you're good at. And a lot of these top liberal athletes, they don't seem to comprehend that.
This man has exhibited and displayed a level of selfishness, the likes of which most of us haven't seen. I don't ever want to hear T.O.'s name again mentioned in this breath, not compared to him. No. I don't ever want to hear Randy Moss's name mentioned, not compared to this. I've never seen anything like it.
Randy Moss was up there with Antonio Brown, at least prior to the rape allegation in the civil suit by Miss Brittany Taylor. Randy Moss was up there. I don't care what you say. He had issues with teammates. He had issues with coaches. He was being passed around different NFL franchises. As a matter of fact, Randy Moss's career was trending very similar to Antonio Brown's at the same point in their careers. They both were on relatively historically relevant franchises the first 8 or 9 years in their career. Then they would move to the Oakland Raiders and then eventually found their way to the New England Patriots.
Ashamed of himself. And I'm going to say this last point, then I'm going to give it to you. I understand that as black men, we have experiences that other people don't have, and we express our points of view, whatever. But understand why. Because you got people on the come up that are going to be looking to emulate that. And they will never get away with what he got away with. And usually...
Well, I have news for you, Stephen A. Smith. Both the NBA and the NFL owners have been watching the effects of quote-unquote woke athletes and what they've been trying to do over the course of the last 4 years. And you better believe that in the next collective bargaining agreements for both leagues, they're going to let the Players Association know, the respective players associations of both the NFL and NBA know, we're not going to tolerate this bullshit anymore.
Those of us that are in a privileged position understand it, and we're sensible enough and unselfish enough to make sure that we don't sully the pathway for others on the come up. Regard it with our very lives and our very careers so we can make sure that we don't do damage to those who will follow us. Antonio Brown didn't care. I don't give a damn about him being with the Patriots or whatever. What I give a damn about is the nonsense that he engaged in to get to this point.
Hypothetically speaking, the quote-unquote nonsense that he engaged in. Hypothetically speaking, that's assuming that you believe that all of this was done on purpose with an end game. I do believe that in the latter stages of his tenure with the Raiders that yes, he and his agent Drew Rosenhaus did decide that they were going to green light an attempt to force their way out of Oakland, but initially I don't believe that.
Disgraceful. I'm ashamed of this brother. That's all I want to say.
I want y'all to follow me on a couple steps I'm about to take you through.
What are we going to follow you to, Dunkin' Donuts?
Ball. I know we talked about the like a quote-unquote conspiracy with the, you know, how everything transpired basically in like 24 hours from being released to all of a sudden magically being signed by the Patriots. But let's rewind a little bit back, okay? Antonio Brown gets traded by the Oakland Raiders. And all the moves that the Oakland Raiders made this offseason was because of not only do they want to become a better team, but everything has a bigger reason. The Oakland Raiders are moving to Las Vegas for a stadium, okay? Scared money doesn't make money, okay? You try to fill seats and all those type of things. So every coach comes in and thinks, well, if I get a guy in my program, maybe I can control him. I can help make him into the player that will be willing to play for our organization. Clearly, that didn't work out. Why? For the reasons that Stephen A., Max, and everyone else has said about Antonio Brown. He's a me-first guy. He's a very selfish guy. He's not an honest guy. So you know what Mike Mayock said? I don't want this. We can't have this guy in our program. I can't. If we're trying to build this culture, a culture similar to New England, there's no way we can do that with this guy in our program.
You assume that they're trying to build a culture similar to New England. If that truly were the case, they would not have traded for Antonio Brown in the first place. Because you cannot plant a seed with Antonio Brown mixed in. You can add Antonio Brown into the branches once that tree has sprung up and grown to its fullness. That's what New England does. Because their seed is Tom Brady and Bill Belichick. So they know how to control these different types of personalities. But when you're trying to do something that you know is going to have a positive outcome, or you hope that it is, you cannot intermingle any negativity. And just to digress for a moment, that's why I always tell brothers, when you're in a state of transition and you're trying to create a new version of yourself, whether you leave your job and you're trying to start a business or what have you, it's really not advisable that you try to have a relationship with a woman, because women are not good with change from their quote-unquote significant other. They need you to be where you're supposed to be, because to be quite frank with you, most women are not supportive when you're going through adversity. It's very difficult for the modern day Western woman to be supportive when you're going through adversity. So if you know you're going through a transitional period, it's best for you to be by yourself, because that's going to give you a far greater understanding of who you are and who you need to be, as opposed to always trying to appease the woman to maintain a relationship that's probably not going to work or last through that transitional period anyway.
Mike Mayock said, okay, we sat by your side with the whole helmet situation. Fine. We sat by your side with the whole crowd therapy situation. Fine. But you're not showing up. You're not coming to practice. You're not doing everything that the other 89 guys are doing.
Once again, Antonio Brown does not consider himself one of the other 89 guys. Antonio Brown considers himself a first ballot Hall of Famer who's coming to the Oakland Raiders from an historically great franchise that has had relatively good success during his tenure there. So he wanted special treatment. It wasn't good enough just for Mike Mayock and John Gruden to publicly support him. He needed them to turn a blind eye to his hijinks, even off camera as well. That was the issue with Antonio Brown. In his view, they were being phony. They were only giving overt support, but they were not giving support behind the scenes. That's what he wanted. And I put support in quotes, because really he means obeisance to his diatribes and his whims.
I got to put the kibosh on that. I'm going to fine you, and I'm going to take your money.
And at that point, that's when Antonio Brown says to himself, "You just a concubine. You're not a wife. You don't have the right to make demands of me."
Brown, it's just crazy. There's no other way around this whole situation. Think about this. What individual would celebrate losing $30 million?
Somebody that knows they're going to get $30 million.
He's not. Hold on.
He got the.
Exactly.
Let me stop right there, okay?
As usual, though, Molly Karam, even though she's correct, cannot control herself.
Okay, this is the second part of the equation. Bill Belichick, no one is going to outfox Bill Belichick, okay? Bill Belichick is the type of person that he buys penny on the dollar, okay? This whole $20 million option, Antonio Brown would never see that. Hold on. He will never see that $20 million.
What if he balls this year and they win a Super Bowl?
Hold on, they had a similar situation with Darrelle Reeves when he came over. He had a 1-year deal with another year with an option year. He never saw that. That's how the Patriots operate. That's how Coach Belichick operates. And this whole $10 million that he's supposed to see this year, guess what it is? It's a signing bonus. You know what you can do with a signing bonus as opposed to like your regular salary? You can structure it any way he wants. So it's basically going to be week to week. You're going to have to prove to me that you're going to follow the Patriots way, because the minute that you don't, you will never see any more money than the following week. That's how the Patriots, they play checkers, not chess.
I think you mean the other way around, brother. You mean chess, not checkers. But I get your point, and you're making great points. But the reality of the situation is that Antonio Brown views the Patriots as a wife, not a concubine. So I expect his conduct to be different, but we'll find out. Because Belichick understands how to handle people like him. Belichick views him as the concubine. Antonio Brown views the Patriots as the wife. He believes that he's finally in the place that is deserving of his respect. Antonio has never believed that he's played for an NFL franchise that was fully deserving of his respect, because he did not appreciate what he saw in Pittsburgh. Even though Antonio has issues, he's a Luciferian and he is an agent of chaos. It's understandable why he does not have the amount of respect for Mike Tomlin that certain people might think he should have, because Mike Tomlin comes off to me as a coach who's full of bluster. I believe that Mike Tomlin is scared to death of Big Ben Roethlisberger. I believe that Mike Tomlin knows his place within an organization, so it's very difficult for Antonio Brown to respect him to the degree that people on the outside believe Antonio Brown should respect Mike Tomlin. When he comes to the Patriots, it's basically a one-stop shop with Bill Belichick. He calls all the shots. He gets all the respect. He's the Don.
That's how they have the they play chess, not checkers. They always come out on the other side of this whole thing. They're willing to take risks in this particular situation, because guess what? It's not going to cost them anything. They're still the Patriots. They're still going to be good with Antonio Brown or without Antonio Brown. So it's really up to Antonio Brown. If you're going to fall in line and be a part of what's going on right here, fine. If you don't, we're going to cut you behind, and who's going to sign you?
But here's where I read the same facts as you do and have much of the same analysis, but let me just present you another alternative that fits the facts you just said. What if Drew Rosenhaus sits down with Antonio Brown and says, they're not going to trade a first and a second for you? Way back, when Mike Tomlin correctly said, as you pointed out many times, we want volunteers, not hostages. He was a well-paid hostage still in Oakland, right? He got out of there. He wasn't a volunteer. What if he said, they're not going to give up a first and a second for you? And had a conversation with Belichick and said, okay, it could be a conversation like this. If it doesn't work out in Oakland, would you be interested? Yeah, but on a 1-year deal. And then all you have to do is go to the client and say, okay, you can get 10 guaranteed, or 9, whatever the number's going to be guaranteed up front. And then you can get the same money, but you're going to have to be a good soldier. You're going to have to are you willing to do that? Then we have to get you out of Oakland. If AB signs up for that, think of the facts. First, there was Helmet Gate, as they say nowadays, right? Then he blasts the team on social media, throws everyone under the bus, including his teammates, about the fines. Then, and doesn't show up to something in the first place even to get the fine, which could void the contract. And he tries to fight the GM. And he uses a slur against the GM. And he illegally records a conversation with the coach. He hired a social media firm, apparently, reportedly. Chris Mortensen.
Chris Mortensen, before Adam Schefter, Chris Mortensen.
So if AB signs up for it, yeah, I want to be on the Patriots. Yeah, I could be a good soldier and get the whole $30 million. If that's the deal worked out ahead of time, all the dots connect.
They do connect. The only thing that is very difficult to understand is why would the Oakland Raiders be so willing to cut AB when they easily could have suspended him for 3 or 4 weeks until they could evaluate him further, unless maybe they had some talks with the New England Patriots and received some money under the table. Who the hell knows?
See, let me tell you what's irrational about your whole conversation.
Go ahead.
Hey, what's irrational is this. You're talking about a me-first guy who had $30 million in the bag, and now you're asking a me-first guy who's been that way his whole career that you basically got to fall in line to try to get $30 million, to try to work and get $30 million. Wait a minute. Which is more than likely you'll never see that $30 million anyway. Because that option, $20 million. Right. You think the Patriots gonna pay AB $20 million?
You went away from it at that last part because it's not really about that. Here's what it's about, guys. He left Pittsburgh because he wanted guaranteed dollars over the course of more than 1 year. He got that from Oakland, then betrayed them.
Because Stephen A. Smith, he's an agent of chaos. They don't have any comprehension of quote-unquote betrayal, because everything is all about what they want at that moment. That's why I always utilize the term narcissist, and I juxtapose it with the whimsical, capricious nature of the woman is what often is exhibited in these top-shelf athletes when they decide that they're going to eviscerate whatever connection they have with their franchise so that they can satiate how they're feeling at that moment. It's very much akin to what we saw with the character, once again, of Joker in the film The Dark Knight. Pushing chaos for the sake of pushing chaos and having a belief that when the dust settles, everything is going to work out in their favor.
That's the issue. You had your money. You betrayed them. Now, you went to a better situation in New England because they're trying to win. But ultimately, everybody, what are we talking about here? We're talking about capitulation. How you're going to have to capitulate to Bill Belichick. You can't sit up there and come to practice late. You can't skip practices. You can't keep the team playing waiting. What's the problem with all of that? It reminds us of what he got away with in Pittsburgh. If you got away with it in Pittsburgh, who does that make us think about? Mike Tomlin. So you sat up there, and as a result, because of your own selfishness, your own petulance, your own childishness.
I agree with most of what you're saying, Stephen A. Smith, but once again, we have to also analyze the respect angle for Mike Tomlin. And if you believe that Antonio Brown is going to respect Mike Tomlin on the same level that he does Bill Belichick, I think that you're being unreasonable. But who knows? We're about to find out how high a level of an agent of chaos Antonio Brown actually is. And I'm sure that certain brothers will claim that Antonio Brown is going to respect Belichick more because he's a so-called Caucasian and Mike Tomlin is a so-called black man. Who knows? That could be a component in there. But in my view, I believe that players are more apt to respect Belichick because he runs the entire ship. And he's been so successful, so lauded, so consistently called a quote-unquote genius. Mike Tomlin has never been called any of those things. And AB has been behind the curtain with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I believe that he looks at Mike Tomlin as just a doger, someone who talks a lot of huff and puff, but behind the scenes is scared of his quarterback, scared of his GM, so on and so forth.
Along with the fact that you seem to have no problem betraying people. You threw Mike Tomlin under the bus. You put him in the eye of the storm because now Mike Tomlin has been accused of being an enabler. You threw Big Ben Roethlisberger under the bus when he's your quarterback and he's got to get with offensive linemen and other people and like, yo, y'all, it was this bad. But you also brought race into the equation, and Ben Roethlisberger was hesitant, from what I was told, to actually talk to those other teammates because he thought they would side with AB. So he never told them all the shenanigans that AB was engaging in.
Well, this is where you should have Ryan Clark in this segment because you're talking a whole lot of nonsense. I did a video about this a while ago, maybe about 3 or 4 months ago, where Ryan Clark reported that one of the main reasons why Big Ben Roethlisberger has had so many issues with some of his black teammates is because he was very confrontational with them when it came to the subject of the quote-unquote national anthem protest. Beyond that, it's very difficult for me to have any feelings of compassion for Big Ben Roethlisberger when everyone knows that Roethlisberger is prone to throw his teammates under the bus. He was the one who really sparked it off when he claimed that Antonio Brown was at fault for the interception that he threw in Denver. So it's not like AB just came out of nowhere with this.
From them, you took Juju Smith-Schuster, your man, the other receiver. You're upset that he got team MVP honors.
Well, I knew that AB was jealous of him, but I also think that Juju Smith-Schuster, he has a lot of snake in him. Just looking at how he conducts himself. He has some snake in him. I'll leave it at that for now because I'm still waiting for that snake to grow. But whenever I see someone always on their social media, he's at the arcade, he's at the mall, always trying to act like he's running for president, this is someone who's very concerned with projecting an image for himself. And people like that behind closed doors, they tend to utilize a lot of machinations to try to dethrone people who they view are in front of them.
Dude, this brother, young brother, 21 years old, got nothing but love and praise for you.
Allegedly.
Throw him under the bus. You reveal private text messages from him, okay? And Ryan Clark won a Super Bowl with this franchise. Works for us. We know what he's made of. You called him a sellout.
Look, I like Ryan Clark, but Ryan Clark is trying to build a far bigger media profile for himself by speaking about Antonio Brown. Some of the things that he has said have been accurate, but it's very clear that Ryan Clark is trying to style himself as an Antonio Brown expert.
Go to Oakland. They ain't got nothing to do with the cryotherapy. They don't have anything to do with the helmet. By the way, when you were filing the grievances against the National Football League, you were on the phone with another brother in Troy Vincent and his crew of dudes, and you going off on them. F-bombs and all of this other stuff. I'm telling you what I know. And then after that, you sit up there, you threaten the GM. The coach is supposed to meet with you, Adam Schefter, and Chris Williamson is reporting how you stood the coach up. After he gave you the $30 million, you apologized to the team. And in a matter of hours after the apology, you go and take the private conversation, violate California state laws that mandate both parties are supposed to agree to a tape conversation.
Unless Gruden agreed to the tape conversation, and that might eventually come out should someone attempt to pursue this portion of this storyline or this narrative. That's why I state it would not surprise me if the Oakland Raiders were in on this concept of releasing Antonio Brown so that the Patriots could sign him. It would not surprise me at all, because I pretty much guarantee you that if this were to appear in court and someone were to attempt to litigate this, John Gruden would say that he knew that he was being recorded.
All of that, you put the conversation on YouTube. On YouTube, everywhere you turn, this brother has violated man codes, decency, professionalism, and on. And oh, by the way, we got brothers out here literally saying, "Way to go, Antonio."
Yeah, but those are idiots. Those are people who cheer on agents of chaos. People who believe that just because someone does what they want to do, that they're doing the right thing.
Hell no. This is the kind of stuff we got to put a stop to. This is not good. This is bad.
Like I saw Kevin Durant in Antonio Brown's comment section, doing the prayer sign and giving him a round of applause. But that's consistent with people like Kevin Durant, cats who are whimsical, who are capricious, and to be quite honest with you, think like women.
Nobody out there should be thinking about emulating this BS.
I really like
Tell us how you really feel, Stephen A. Smith. And on top of that, how well do you think the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to do this year? Because that's the real reason why you're upset.
I think it's a very strong take, but I have a question for you. Is your principal objection, I know it works on both levels,
yes,
is your principal objection that in a team sport, or just for common decency, that level of narcissism and selfishness, the
ding,
work doesn't fly and shouldn't be rewarded? Or is it more that as a black man, because you have mentioned it before, you think there's a greater degree of responsibility to other African Americans in particular? Is that your principal objection?
Both, but certainly more the latter. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Because guess why? Because any black person out there that tries to emulate his behavior, I promise you 99% of those folks will suffer dire consequences.
Not 99%, 99.99%. And I've already addressed this in this video. You have certain super liberal sportscasters like Joy Taylor and a lot of these other liberal females in the sports world who enjoy seeing the promotion of chaos because they're agents of chaos themselves by nature, who are trying to imply that what Antonio Brown is doing is going to become in vogue with many other players across the NFL and the NBA. Oh, we're in a new time now where players are speaking up for themselves. Look, you can speak up for yourself all you want. At the end of the day, you have to have the cachet of an elite level player in your league. And that does not even mean the top 1%. That's the top 0.1% or even the top 0.01%. Antonio Brown is just very fortunate that at this stage of his career, he fits into that top 0.1 or top 0.01% designation.
I'm not going to sell my people out by
allegedly
allowing folks to think for 1 second. And I'm not saying that other people can get away with it. Please don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to imply that. But as a black man, let me be very, very clear. You try that nonsense in any profession, you're going to pay a price that will cost you everything. Do not emulate this man. Real quick.
Well, that's a bit of liberal Negro fear-mongering, or boule Negro fear-mongering, I should say, even though those two demographics tend to intersect here and there. Boule Negroes, they love to fear-monger for their overlords, the elite level Caucasian. I will say this. If you're going to make a move like Antonio Brown, you better have a tremendous amount of confidence in yourself, and you better not worship the quote-unquote almighty dollar, because he is going to compromise the furtherance of his career from here, unless he's able to completely ball out with the New England Patriots, which is highly possible. We'll see. But Stephen A. Smith, as usual, he's going above and beyond to make sure that he can implement the fear of this society and the fear of this overall corporate structure that he believes the so-called black man should have, because he's a fearful Negro.
Do not do it. It sounds to me like you're marrying two different ideas there. On the one hand, it is on principle the wrong thing to do.
Yeah, what does it profit the man to gain the world if only to lose his soul? That's the quote that comes to mind.
Particularly considering the plight of African American stereotypes, etc. Don't throw everyone else under the bus to get ahead. But you're marrying that idea on principle with the idea that for the vast majority of people, that won't work anyway. Which is more important to you? The principle that it's the wrong thing to do, or the fact that you believe it will have negative consequences?
I believe the principle is more important than just the consequences, because that's what I want to know. That's what I'm made of. But I also think it's important because here's the deal that I believe is problematic in our society. I believe too many people talk about principle, and there's not enough conversation about consequences. When you start talking about consequences, oh, trust me, people hear then. You can sit up there and tell your kid you wanted one of your wonderful daughters all day. I know I do it. Look, don't do this, don't do this, don't do that. But when you remind them of the price to be paid, if they don't listen, suddenly the ears start tingling a little bit more.
Well, Stephen A. Smith, that's what a structured society is all about. That's why you have codes and laws and statutes, because there are many people who are not going to do the right thing. One of the most nonsensical things I've ever heard was from one of these wokety woke liberal black, i.e. fake pro-black leaders, who stated that we don't need the Bible because it's common sense for people to do the right thing, when it's actually the opposite. It's actually common sense for people to do what's best for them. That's why you have a government and laws and codes and repercussions for your actions, so that people who don't naturally understand what it means to do the right thing are compelled to do the right thing or suffer the consequences.
Folks hear you. We need to talk about consequences more, because we don't.
Here's the bottom line with this whole AB situation. Okay, this is how I know this dude is crazy. Go from having $30 million in the bag right now to basically where New England has all the leverage with the way they structure their signing bonus. You have to literally earn it every week within their structure, that Patriots way structure. You listen, I've been in meetings in New England where Bill Belichick is ripping you in front of everybody. You think Antonio Brown has ever been used to someone just undressing him in front of the whole team? And he's got to do that every week for the next 15, 16 weeks? You think he can handle that? That's why I don't think he's going to last. He's going to last this whole season.
On the field, what's the problem with Antonio, though? Who's going to, in film study, you're going to rip Antonio?
Listen.
Well, you're the layman, so you're going to assess Antonio Brown as a fan. Bill Belichick is not going to assess Antonio Brown as a fan. We see a splendid pass catcher. Bill Belichick is going to undress Antonio Brown for certain assignments that he missed on the field, because we know Antonio Brown, he's not someone who loves to block. He's not really someone who loves to do things that a great football player needs to do other than catch the football. That's the main separation between him and Jerry Rice. For those of you brothers out there who watched Jerry Rice in the mid to late 80s into the 90s, on some of those great runs down the field by Roger Craig or Ricky Waters, or even Steve Young when he would scramble and start running down the field, 30-yard runs, 40-yard runs, you see Jerry Rice and John Taylor, for that matter, blocking dudes 40, 50 yards down the field. Antonio Brown ain't doing that shit.
You might. Maybe here and there.
Hold on. Let me tell you something.
Roethlisberger and them said that sometimes he picked his own routes to run. He didn't run the right way. Try that in New England.
Let me tell you something. I was in meetings where the first person who was getting ripped and undressed was Tom Brady. Of course. I mean, undressed. You don't think Coach Belichick would do that?
No, I'm saying when
Antonio Brown ain't gonna give him anything to complain about.
No. What I'm saying is he'll give him less than most. But what I'm saying is when you have the culture setter like Tim Duncan in San Antonio, or Tom Brady with Popovich, or Tom Brady with Belichick, and everyone sees that guy can be undressed, then everyone can be undressed.
That's a better point, because that was one of Antonio Brown's contentions in Pittsburgh, was the preferential treatment. So we'll see if Antonio Brown is a man of his word. Thus far, he's proven that he's really not. But we'll see. He's going to be in a higher level environment, so heat normally does one of two things. It either brings out the best in you or it makes you melt.
Damien, it's not apples to apples, though, because he wasn't going to win with the Raiders.
Well, not just that.
The Super Bowl.
Do y'all want me to tell y'all?
I would agree with that.
Want me to tell y'all what the good news about this is? Rhetorical question before I answer this. Do y'all believe somebody like this should be in complete control of their own destiny at the expense of anything and everyone else? Y'all believe it? No. You don't believe that, right?
No, I don't.
Well, guess what? Antonio Brown no longer has the freedom he once had. Had he got...
Well, he never really had freedom. That's why he had to utilize hijinks to get out of Pittsburgh and Oakland. So the concept of freedom is subjective. I don't think that he has any less freedom, quote unquote, in New England. He just has less options.
Tonight and play tonight for the Oakland Raiders. As of tomorrow morning, the whole $29.125 million left on his deal would have been guaranteed. Now, yeah, the money looks like it's there, but it's at the disposal, at the discretion of the New England Patriots.
Of course, because Bill Belichick is a high-level MK handler. He knows how to handle people like Antonio Brown. And that's, you feed them one crumb at a time. You don't give them the whole slice of bread.
Real quick, what's a Super Bowl worth to Antonio Brown, who's done everything else?
I don't know.
So the money that money would have made him much harder to trade. He got to where he wanted to go. He got a good chunk of the money, and he's going to win a Super Bowl now.
All right, still to come. The NFL.
That's speculation, but we'll find out.